here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of David Whitaker, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all the other groovy stuff. Was in various bands in the early 80s and has had a life in music ever since, including Leeds-based band Music for Pleasure and also the Dance Society. So this is the interview, which you'll find out all about that musical adventure. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. David, it's over to you.
Well, I was born in 58, so I can remember seeing the Beatles in Scarborough in probably about 63 or 64. So it was the Beatles, really, that sort of started my sort of musical journey.
Right. My God.
Yeah.
So did you say you saw them live?
Well, not live. They were doing some sort of like appearance on the top of a theatre, the Futurist Theatre in Scarborough, just sort of like waving to fans.
Yes.
So,
and what year was that?
I think that was probably about 63, 64 or something like that.
The early years, my God. And that was the sort of moment things slightly changed for you.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes. And did you have any older brothers or sisters who gave you any musical direction in life?
No, I'm an only child, so my granddad was a jazz guitarist, so he sort of like gave me some early musical direction as well.
Right, and then from there, and then sort of when you got to, I mean, would you have been that aware of the kind of the sort of 60s musical scene that sort of changed with the 67, the Summer of Love, and then sort of, you know, being excited with all the different albums coming out from like Jefferson Airplane or Hendrix or the Doors or the Stones, people like that. Was music certainly on your radar at that stage?
It was, but it was sort of classical music. I was, taught piano and clarinet and that type of thing. So it wasn't until the early 70s that, hearing, say, Roxy music or something like that, that sort of like awoke my sort of things in pop music, really. It sort of made me aware of another genre, another sort of like thing which was happening within music.
Yes. Did you say, was it piano and clarinet you were playing?
That's right, yeah.
Right. So were you going to sort of go towards a much more of a orchestral, classical kind of musical back? Was that kind of your direction when you were growing up?
It was initially, yeah. It was sort of, I had a piece played by the London Symphony Orchestra when I was probably 18 or 19. So I was set in that direction. But suddenly I thought, pop music, you can get free beer and women and whatever. So
this is true, yes. Did you go to a grammar school then?
No, I didn't know. Just a proper sort of like really terrible school in Leeds.
Right, there you go. Yes, I know. The world of the modern school, which I went to when I was growing up, actually, which they didn't really even want you to bother with sort of exams at the end of it, really. CSEs, it was just like, you must just leave. It's Easter, you can leave now.
I remember seeing the sort of careers advisor, and he said, what would you like to do? And I said, I'd like to be a classical composer. And he thought about it for a second, then said, have you thought about heavy engineering? So it was a really terrible time for, being creative.
Well, absolutely. Yes, I often think back. The job of a careers advisor during that period must have been very easy. Actually, being a teacher, I thought, because they didn't really worry about doing exams and standards. It was just like, it was boggling, really. So how come? So was it your sort of? Did you say you had an uncle who was a jazz guitarist?
It was my granddad who was a jazz guitarist.
Right. Was that how sort of music got kind of introduced, or the access to sort of musical instruments at that stage? Because I could imagine getting a piano was quite a big thing.
Yeah, well, my music teacher was sort of like great. He sort of donated a piano, an upright piano, so I could practice and, get into music in that way.
Right. My God. So did you just have an absolute natural talent for this, kind of being able to compose and pick music up really easily?
It seems to be that way. Yeah. I found it quite easy.
God, that's amazing. Yes. And did you have a passion for sport and football as well? Or was it just music?
Absolutely not. No. And being in sort of a terrible school, being involved with music was sort of you were sort of like shunned, really. It's sort of like you were sort of like just pushed aside. It's that crazy guy who likes music.
Yes, I could imagine at that time with Leeds United being such a sort of force in the first division, it must have been very sort of quite an aggressive atmosphere at
Yeah.
times. You wanted to be Norman Hunter or Billy Burnham, I suppose.
Mm.
So then, so you left school at 16, which would have been about 19. Was that 72 or 74?
It'd been about 75, I think. Yeah.
Right. So that was that period. And what was your sort of, you had your classical music, and then you mentioned Roxy Music. What was the first kind of single and first album you bought during that time?
I became obsessed by Bebop Deluxe and Bill Nelson.
Brilliant.
Probably that was about 74, I think, something like that.
Right.
6. I became totally obsessed by Bebop Deluxe.
And I think he's still going, isn't he?
He is, yeah. Well, later in the 80s, I was asked to join his band Red Noise, but I was already contracted to Polydor at that time, so I couldn't actually do it.
Right. God. I can't remember if I did an interview with him recently or not, actually. It's like, God, my memory's sort of fading. Because I think he's got a new album coming out, or it's just...
He brings an album out every, 2 months.
Actually, you're right. I can see that he's very prolific, isn't he? Yeah. God, dear old boy. So then at sort of 75, with the wonderful world of Bebop Deluxe, which I've managed to butcher, did those other sort of bands at that time, like, I don't know, Richard Strange and the Doctors of Madness or Dr. Feelgood, did they sort of come onto your radar at that sort of mid?
Oh, they did actually, yeah, because there was an amazing club in Leeds called the F Club, run by a great guy called John Keenan.
John Keenan, yes.
Loads of bands. So I'd be down there every night seeing, Doctors of Madness and Punishment of Luxury and every band you could possibly think of.
My God, that latter band, I'm desperately trying to get an interview with this chap, actually. So yes, they're just amazing, incredible kind of scene, actually, at that point. And as you left school at 16, did you sort of go into college, or did you have to sort of find the wonderful world that was work at that point?
I went to music college in Leeds for 3 years, and came out and started bands, and obviously influenced by the F Club.
Right. God, that was quite a scene. And obviously Leeds then slowly morphs into this kind of quite a scene, wasn't it, really, with...
What's at that time?
With the kind of, I don't know, there was a very good book somebody wrote about a year ago about this particular college in Leeds that had the people like the Mekons and Gang of Four all went to it. You probably know it, don't you?
I do, yes.
Yes, I can't remember the author or the book, but apart from that, I'm doing well, actually, aren't I? Yeah. So what was the first kind of musical band that you created at this stage? Was this music for pleasure? Well,
I was in various punk bands, and then I remember going to London and buying a synthesizer and hearing Ultravox's Systems of Romance and thinking, this is the future. So from the punk band, it sort of like became a synth band, and that's where Music for Pleasure was formed.
Right, that was that sort of the turning point. And did you get sort of, as you were a keyboard player, did you also get slightly swept into the prog world with Rick Wakeman or Keith Emerson at this point?
No, not really. No, it was definitely sort of like the Ultravox end of magazine, Ultravox, that type of thing. That was sort of like more drawn towards.
Born post-punk. What about that sort of 75, 76 kind of punk scene? Did that not just come on your radar, but did you sort of get quite engrossed with it?
Yeah, I did. I quite liked punk, but there still seemed something missing. It was just too aggressive. There was no finesse there, and I thought with synthesizers that it would add, another layer to hard hitting music, really.
Yes. So did you, I mean, was Music for Pleasure the sort of the band that, was that the sort of musical moments before that sort of morphed into this particular group that you got together with yourself, Mark, Ivan, and Chris?
Yeah, we started off. I mean, there was a completely different lineup before those guys, and we just sort of got the right people at the right time. And then when we got the deal with Polydor, that really helped, sort of like cohesion. There was some cohesion there to keep us all, focus.
Yes, because you released a couple of singles on Rage Records, The Human Factor and
Well, yeah.
Fuel to the Fire, which was, and were you playing live at this stage as well?
Yeah, we did the usual sort of like every university in the country and colleges and that type of thing.
God, that's fantastic. You got your transit van and off you went.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we did tour with Simple Minds and Talk as well at that time.
God, that was fun. Did you have a manager at that point?
Yes, we did. A guy called Andrew. He was amazing, sort of like just pushed us through the music business because it was quite tough at that time.
Yes, I would imagine. So was there in the sort of early 80s this kind of weekend festival with all these kind of new bands that started happening, like quite a futuristic kind of festival, which I'm trying to sort of...
Yeah, there was Futurama Festival.
That's
Again,
the one, yes.
we played, I think it was the second one, I think it was about 1980.
Right, because this was also promoted by John Keenan as well, wasn't it, really? So this one, because the first one was in sort of 79 and then the second one was in 1980. Which one were you in?
We're in 1980 in Leeds in a tram shed. It was an enormous echoey tram shed.
Yes.
But there was, everybody on there, Susie and the Banshees and U2, just a collection of fantastic bands.
Oh, yes. Clock, DVA, The Echo and the Bunnymen. Yes. And God, that must have... What was the atmosphere like at that particular event?
It was absolutely amazing. I mean, there was so many people there, just thousands of people crammed into a tram shed with just a massive stage at the end. It just felt like you were playing some enormous festival, which was amazing for, a first gig of a band, really.
Well, I could imagine. I know. I know there's a little bit of... Actually, there's hardly any documentation, is there, and photographs of these kind of events. It was
all filmed by the BBC, but there was some contractual involvement, so it couldn't be actually being released.
Oh my God, that is such a shame. Because to see what it was like, I mean, you see the posters and think, my God, that's extraordinary. It probably costs about £2.50 to go and see as well. So, and did that time, I mean, there was also, there's the music, which we obviously think, wow, what a great soundtrack. But, 79, Thatcher gets in, and then we have the, Falkland War, and then the miners' strike, Greenham Common. What was it like in Leeds for you during that time? Because I know if you... during that period, then the anarcho-punk scene of Leeds start to develop. So what was it like for you in 79 to 80?
Well, within Music for Pleasure, I think we just avoided politics. There was quite a heavy sort of like racism thing going off in Leeds, which, we tried to distance ourselves from completely. So, yeah, we were totally apolitical, really.
Yes. So then, after your singles, you got signed to Polydor Records, which must have felt like a massive sort of thumbs up, really. So then when you went to do your first album, Into the Rain, did you sort of have it all sort of rehearsed and demoed before going into the studio?
Yeah, we had more or less everything rehearsed, demoed, and then the producer Mike Hedges came in and just took the whole thing apart and rebuilt it, which was amazing.
Yes. And were you pleased with the final sound?
I was at the time, but hearing it now, I would definitely change, a few things. But that's
And with that, and so you said you had been touring quite a lot and supporting various bands like Simple Minds and Talk Talk. When that album came out, did you go back on? Did you promote it much around the country?
it was constantly promoted. But the usual, Polydor. It's a two-way thing. I mean, we were promoting as much as we can, but I don't think Polydor pushed. They didn't really get the album, so they didn't really push it as much as really they should have done.
Yes. And did you play? Was the 1 in 12 club in existence at that point in Bradford?
I don't think it was. We played Bradford University. I remember that one.
Right. Did you ever come to East Anglia and Norwich or Ipswich?
Yes, I'm sure we did. We'd been every, university or college.
You've been to every one in that transit van.
Yes.
Did you ever see Bad News, the comic strips Bad News? And
No, I didn't know.
it was just a few years before Spinal Tap, but
Right.
they were sort of a heavy metal band in their transit van going around the country, having moments. And so, what was the atmosphere like once the album came out and you'd done your tour with the band? You did a second album, didn't you, which was on a different label? Did you get dropped at that stage
We
by
got
Polydor?
dropped by Polydor, and then we really didn't know what to do. So we thought the best thing to do is, off our own back, release an album because we had so much material recorded. So we thought we'd release it.
And Whirlpool on Whirlpool Records. Is this your own?
It is, yeah.
Right, Blacklands. Did that? So, do you own your music still, or no?
Yes, it's still copyrighted. Yeah, so we still haven't seen any money from it. I must admit, for a long time.
I know that's always so tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, where did you record the follow-up album?
Recorded some in London, some tracks in London, and mostly in Bridlington of all places.
Yes. And who was your producer at that stage?
A guy called Colin Richardson, who went on to produce some really famous heavy metal bands.
Oh God, I haven't come across that name. Is he still around?
He still is, yeah. He's still somewhere around.
And did you get excited with that kind of Leeds community scene of other bands that were starting to form and develop around the city?
Well, funnily enough, the book you mentioned earlier about sort of the Leeds scene, it does make out that everybody was sort of like getting on well together, but in reality, every band hated each other.
I would imagine. I mean, when you're young,
especially have a tiny bit of success, or then there's just a certain amount of jealousy that comes in as well.
A massive dollop of jealousy, I would imagine. The anger of yes, you could imagine the sort of when you I don't know, young people sort of in that sense of slight desperation as well as kind of ego and arrogance. I mean, it's always going to make people. I mean, with a lot of people I spoke to when they've done these festivals recently, well, in the last few years, and with other bands, I think they all feel like, God, I wish we were nice. We're nice now. I wish we could have been a bit nicer back then and just enjoyed each other's companies, but we despised each other quite badly. So,
I mean, I still have friends now who are in bands like The Mission and the Expelaires, who I see quite often. And but apart from that, no, everybody hated each other.
Yes. So then as the 80s was progressing and we'd sort of, I don't know, the music scene, there would been, I suppose, new romantic scene, there'd been anarcho-punk, there would been psychobilly. I mean, indie pop starts to really develop that, I suppose, the jingly-jangly sounds.
Yeah.
I mean, I put it down like, I suppose, when the Smiths came along from 83 for about 5 years. I mean, there was definitely a bit of a scene there with a lot of bands like the Primitives, Mighty Lemon Drops, and and then the Australian bands like the Go-Betweens and Triffids. I mean, what was your sort of musical direction during that period?
Well, after Music for Pleasure sort of like collapsed, I joined a band called the Dance Society.
Right, yes.
So Music for Pleasure didn't have a guitar. It was just pure synths. But then I went into another band which had guitars. So it was a completely different sort of like reawakening for me, really.
Yes. And they'd been going a few years.
That's right. Yeah, they've been going quite a while. And then I made an album called Heaven is Waiting. And then the keyboard player left. So I was sort of like pulled in for that one.
Right. So that's the next album was the one Looking Through, which has All I Want, Institution. So that's the album that you played on.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And had they had much of a lineup change apart from the keyboard player at that stage?
No, they were quite stable. It was just the keyboard player that left.
Right. What was it like going into a band that had been around for quite a few years, being the new person?
Well, it was odd, really, because they were from Barnsley as well. And they've obviously all grown up together. So I was just the new boy. So it took quite a long time for me to be, accepted, really.
Yes.
I was like a session player originally. And then after a year or so, then I felt a proper part of the band.
Yes. And what was it like, in comparison, like with the audience and the kind of image of the band at that point?
Well, they had really good management. Simon Napier Bell of Nomis, who managed Japan and
T-Rex, I think.
Yeah, he was sort of like a massive manager who was also a bully. He used to sort of like call me up at 3:00 in the morning and get me out of bed and say, "Have you written anything?" I say, "Well, I'm sleeping."
Yes, that must have been quite an awakening. What was he like when he wasn't waking you up at 3 when you actually met him in normal hours? Was he okay, or was he
okay. He was just a businessman. He was an incredibly good businessman. And we go into the office, and then there'd be Wham sat outside, waiting to come in, and it was just amazing to be in that atmosphere.
Well, I would imagine, actually. Mm-hmm. Yes, I know. It must have been very. Yes, people like that are probably quite intolerant, really, when things aren't going their way. So when got drafted into the band to do Looking Through, were you part of the kind of the creative songwriting process as well?
Yeah. Initially, it was just playing the old tunes from Heaven is Waiting, but then obviously the management said, "Look, we need new material." So then I was drafted in to properly, become involved.
Yes. And what was it like when you were coming up with suggestions or sort of ideas and, putting your sort of idea, putting your sort of input towards the band? Was that kind of okay?
Yeah, as I say, after, a while, then things sort of like gelled, and I felt as though I could put my own sort of like stamp on things and put things forward.
Yes. So then, sort of 87, did the band continue for much longer in the 80s?
Yeah, we went to America a few times and recorded a single with Stock Waterman and Aiken.
Blimey.
Which was a disaster.
I would imagine. What was that atmosphere like in the studio?
Well, funnily enough, we filled a van, the usual transit van, down to London, got to the studio, started to unload the gear, and Pete Waterman said, "Please don't unload any gear. You just stay in a hotel for 2 weeks, come back after 2 weeks, and your single will be ready." So they just took the original demos and did it all themselves.
Right. So what was that, the single Hold On?
No, that was a single called Say It Again.
Say It Again. Yeah. So were you on Arista Records at that stage?
Yeah.
Right. So that was and Yeah. What was it? Were you getting kind of intrigued and excited about life in the studio as well?
Well, we'd heard rumours that we probably weren't going to be um, playing that much on the single itself. They were just going to take the demos, but it just came as a bit of a shock when somebody says go away for 2 weeks.
Yes, I could imagine it was very strange. And you did a video as well.
Yeah, we did a video. Yeah,
Did you enjoy the video experience?
I did. Yeah, I really loved it. Especially Hold On, because we were swung around in a cage for 8 hours.
Fantastic. That must have, you wouldn't be able to do that now, would you?
Really?
Yes. And what was it like touring in America? Because I know with a lot of bands I've interviewed, they've often said that was the thing that slightly was the nail in the coffin with the band, and they thought, we can't, we've done it. We've been, dynamically. What was it like for you?
Well, we only did the East Coast, so it wasn't, the usual sort of like small town type things. I loved it. I loved being in America, even though I must admit New York especially was a pretty dodgy place at that time.
Yes. I mean, because the music scene was changing quite a lot. I mean, technology-wise, were you sort of adding a lot of instruments to your sort of collection at this point?
Yeah, I was a complete avid synthesizer collector. And because the record companies would throw money at us, really, at that time, I had quite a few synthesizers.
Fantastic. You were becoming the Rick Wakeman of indie pop, weren't you? Yeah, I know. There you go. So were there any other bands that you were intrigued by or curious by, music scenes during that mid to late 80s?
Oh, I always loved Talk. After touring with them, and I don't think they ever spoke one word to us, but we were on tour for probably a month. But I just love the way that they morphed from a really terrible pop band into this sort of experimental jazz sort of band. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, because I know with some of their early work, I find that production is I don't know, it feels very dated actually. I don't know, there was that 80s sound that was the mainstream, which yes, I suppose Trevor Horn brought it in, didn't he? And then it got taken as the go-to sound for quite a lot of people during that
very
period.
generic at that time. Every band sounded very similar.
Yes, I did, and still have sort of in my mind, I can still see those shots of Top of the Pops with happy people dancing with lots of balloons in the air and that kind of it was just too much, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah.
So then, as the end of the 80s started to sort of creep up, what was your sort of direction at that point? When did Dance Society fold?
87, I would have thought. Yeah, about 87, things sort of like just stopped again. The usual, drop by the record company, lack of money, drop by the management. So just a case of finding either a new band or a new sort of musical area to go into.
Yes, God, I know. And did you? Because at that stage, I mean, Paul Gilmartin was still your drummer at that point.
It was, yeah.
Yes, God, I did an interview with him a few years ago. He was such a nice chap, but
he was amazing. Yeah,
he just rock and roll was just not good for his health, was it?
No, I could see that. I mean, he was like my best friend, and I could see this sort of like wanting somehow to be back in the 80s in him.
Yes, I think that was, he just needed to be on stage with a drum kit, didn't he, really?
Yeah,
drummer. I know, God, it's such a sad, I was a bit shocked when I saw he just passed away. But yes, but then he did tell me he had quite a lot of health issues and such like. So So then, as we creep into the 90s, what's your next musical moment then?
My best friend worked at Yorkshire Television in the music department, and rang me one day and said a composer's dropped out of a writing a television program. Could you do it? So I said, well, I'll have a go. And then I spent the next 10, 15 years involved in television music.
Right, doing soundtracks as well as...
Doing soundtracks, yeah, and incidental music, and I did adverts for like Lynx and Ford, and it just snowballed from there, really, from the initial sort of like television.
God, that must have been the ideal thing to have after you've spent 10 years in various bands and playing live in various clubs around the country and America.
Well, they were just totally different sort of animals, really, television people compared to pop music. There was never any sense of fun in television. Everything was sort of like very just so much money involved in making television programs. Fun wasn't sort of like on the cards, really.
Yes. And did you feel with the 90s, because obviously the 80s, it was one thing that, from a lot of people, there was just not much money, and, an awful lot of musicians at that stage were sort of signing on the dole, and there was job seekers allowance and enterprise allowance schemes that gave people some sort of form of kind of ability to live and just eat very carefully with cheap food. A lot of people had TVP as their main diet, almost, with tins of tomato and pasta. But the 90s, so there wasn't a lot of money floating about, but the 90s, suddenly things started to change so much during that John Major, Tony Blair period. And suddenly, I don't know, suddenly Top of the Pops suddenly had these kind of bands that we would have thought were just indie bands who would have just been in the back of the NME in their indie charts, suddenly on selling massive amounts of records with quite unbelievably sort of, mediocre songs, really. Did you sort of, at that stage, were you making any music in any kind of, other combinations or combos?
Not really, no. I was totally sort of like committed to earning as much money as I could, really, within television, because there was a lot of money around in television at that time. So I had no time for pop music as such.
No, you must have. And did you keep in touch with any of your old sort of, I don't know, previous bandmates at that stage, finding out where they...
No, I didn't. Not until recently. I met the rest of Music for Pleasure a few months ago. But I always kept in contact with people in the Dance Society, especially Gigi, the drummer.
Yes.
So we always kept in contact.
Yeah, well, that's nice. And then sort of as we got into the new millennium, what was your sort of, were you still in television at that stage, or were you having a change?
Yeah, it was just towards the end. As soon as the internet became involved, television started to sort of like think, well, it's much cheaper to buy off the shelf than, have music made bespoke. So I could see that the whole situation was sort of like changing.
Yes. And then did you start to sort of do more production? Did you start doing engineering or producing people?
Well, I had so much equipment, recording equipment, for the television stuff at a studio.
So you bought a lot of studio, you bought a lot of equipment in the 80s and then even more in the 90s.
Yeah, we did a program called Heartbeat, which sort of like generated in the 90s a lot of money. So we just invested. I invested the money that I got from that really into a studio. And then when television stopped being profitable, I thought, I'm stuck with tons of recording equipment. What should I do?
Yes.
So I set up a commercial studio in Leeds.
And what did you call it?
It's called the Old Chapel.
Right. So this is where you've got on your social media page,
the
Facebook page. So did that start in sort of early 2000?
No, it was later, just a bit later than then. But there was maybe a few years when television was sort of like on the way down, and I was sort of like putting the studio into the Old Chapel.
Yes.
Getting it going, really.
And did you always have a sort of were you able to sort of turn your skills and sort of abilities into sort of
Yeah.
creating quite a nice place? Was it also a kind of a community hub as well?
It is. It still is. So, we deal with sort of like mental health groups and children of no money, want to come in and rap, all sorts of things.
My
We
God,
have the Kaiser Chiefs sort of like house next door as well. So they're involved. They invested some money into the building as well.
my God, so you've been doing this for several decades now.
Uh, Quite soon it'll be my 50th anniversary of being in the music business.
God, that must be fantastic.
Well, it is now in this day and age, yeah.
All right, yes. So is it the case that then you give bands, both young and old, guidance of sort of
Yeah.
sound and sort of help, expertise, and all the rest?
Well, I try. But it's difficult in the creative industry because, they have their own vision. I just try to sort of like push them slowly, maybe in a different direction, or just say, why don't you try this type of thing? Like the old producers used to doing, this producers like Mike Hedges and John Leckie, these sort of producers weren't sort of like dictatorial, really. They sort of like just helped and suggest. And that's how I try to sort of like approach it.
Yes, I think Steve Albini was the same, actually.
Yeah.
I think he just tried to encourage, actually. And have you sort of seen quite a few, people go on to do quite successful musical ventures via your studio?
Not really. I think it's become more and more difficult, especially for bands, to sort of like survive.
Yes.
So I had an amazing band called Maskins, who put one album out, and then within 2 months of putting the album out, they'd split up, and because they couldn't survive financially.
Yes, I know. I mean, I think what was quite good about that period, I don't know, I suppose we understand it, the 80s, was that there was just enough sort of money, but also sort of the next goal to go for, whether it was because I found that most bands have a bit of a 5-year narrative. They have that 12-month honeymoon period, and
Yeah.
a John Peel play when they get that single, and then a session at the Maida Vale Studios, which is great, and then the little transit van doing a few gigs around. But then the first album, the transit van bus go to a few more. I mean, there's the art centres, and you had the Duchess in Leeds, didn't you, as well? And we had the Norwich Arts Centre with the Wild Club, and every place had an alternative night, which, I don't know, when you're young and you want to play music, that's what you want to do, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it just gives people that idea that something, something to plan for, something to execute, and then at least you've got something to show for it. And then the next album or the next single and next project. So it sort of keeps teases bands along a bit further down the line.
Like funding, really. At least the record company's funded for a while, just to make sure that they give the bands an initial sort of like lift.
Yes.
Even though you got dropped if you didn't sell the records, but initially, you were funded.
And there were quite a lot of labels at that stage as well. I mean, there was the obvious ones like Rough Trade, but there was Glass Records and the Pink label. And I mean, there was an awful lot. And also, like cities, like you obviously Leeds had quite a music identity, and Bristol had one, and Brighton had one, and Glasgow. I'm not sure about Norwich, to be honest. We had the Farmers Boys and the Higsons and Serious Drinking. I mean, it was a bit of a scene, but, it didn't have that, I don't think Norwich is quite big enough to have it. But we had the university, and there was various bands, or people who were in bands who went on. Terry Edwards was one of them, and Charlie Higson. But, I mean, it sort of helps create a scene, really. And I guess your studio serves that purpose in that community as well.
Yeah, it's just to help, really. We seem to have more and more rappers come through. That's the sort of kids really want to go into that area now.
Yes.
And less bands. which
Yeah. I know it's a bit of a shame, but
yeah.
you kind of can understand why. And Dance Society, do you still keep? You said you keep in touch with them that much, the members,
Yeah.
and they're still. I know they're still sort of quite active at times, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I mean, we had a reunion, so we all got together to play in Leipzig. But Steve, the singer, he was based in LA, so he didn't come over and do it. So we had a lady suggested called Maeve. So she came on board as a singer, really.
Fantastic. And did you enjoy it?
I did. I found it really hard work, though. As you get older, it becomes harder and harder, sort of like touring and being in a different city every day. So, yeah, it was exciting, but just hard work.
Yes. And have you been amazed with all the bands from that period that are still sort of not only just come back, but are still trying to make new music and still going on tour and do bits and pieces? You must be having a slight awareness of seeing them sort of returning.
Yeah, there seems to be like a massive nostalgia sort of like market at the moment. All the bands that, a bit like the Dance Society, who were just on the verge of doing something. There's quite a lot of those sort of bands have come back, like Modern English and all those type of things. All those.
Yes, I know. And and also people are really keen on their archives at the moment. So they're sort of going through and trying to put together any bits and pieces that they feel is kind of relevant, which I think is quite nice, actually. And I know record labels like Cherry Red Records are very good at putting together box sets just to sort of, it's almost like feeling of completion, really.
Yeah, I mean, Music for Pleasure's been on quite a few of the Rough Trade compilations.
Oh, that's right. And there was, because Cherry Red did one on Liverpool, then Manchester box set, and then Sheffield. There was a Scottish one, and there was a Leeds
Yeah,
compilation.
right.
Yes, and I think, was the Dance Society on it, or was it Music for Pleasure?
Just Music for Pleasure. Yeah.
Right, because yes, who was the person who put that compilation together?
I think initially it was a guy called Richard Vrushka.
That's right. Yes.
I think he was.
Yeah. Yeah, so I know Leeds have had it. Did you? I mean, in that period, because you said you weren't particularly political, but there was those, I don't know, anarcho bands like Chumbawamba. Did you ever sort of cross paths with that scene at all, or did that totally different orbit?
Totally different orbit, but now I still sort of come across different members of those sort of bands who, either bring people into the studio or, are involved with kids. So I've met, a few members of Chumbawamba just over the last couple of years.
Yes, I think quite a few of them are still doing musical projects or some form of creative project, really. So, and I think was it Dunstan Bruce did a film as well about
Right, yeah.
the band, which was quite nice to watch. So yeah. So going forward, then, what's your on your sort of on your calendar at the moment? Sort of, is it studio work? I didn't know if you got any music that was coming up.
I'm working at the moment with a guy called Robin Simon, who was, funnily enough, the guitarist in Ultravox on the Systems of Romance album. So we're putting some tracks together, trying to get John Fox, the original singer of Ultravox, to do the vocals.
God, that must be very exciting. So you're just doing the music at the moment?
Yeah, we're recreating some of the original tracks from that album, but sort of like modernising, putting our own sort of like touches on the whole thing.
Yes. And has that been enjoyable?
It's been incredible, yeah. Loved every second. I've always loved the guitar work of Robin Simon because he was in the bands that I've mentioned, like Magazine and Visage and Ultravox. So he's got a real pedigree.
Yes. Because I think was Dave Formula, was he in Visage, wasn't he? Was that
Yeah,
Were
it was.
quite a
Yeah,
few members of magazine suddenly were in Visage, which was quite a weird one.
yeah.
Yeah, because I think Dave Formula is actually sort of coming over and touring soon. Actually, I think he's got some dates around, which is yes, quite
Amazing.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you could have whispered something to your like 16-year-old self starting out in music, is there anything in particular that you would have said? Yes, I would have told them that.
I'd have said, don't go for fame. Really, it's not the be all and end all. And at that time, I thought it's great to be. I'd love to be, walking down the street and signing autographs or whatever. But um, in hindsight, I think no, that's not what the whole thing's about. It's about being creative and just, expressing who you are in music.
Yes, I think if you need longevity, at the end of the day, it's going to be about the music, isn't it? Really, than the hairstyle. Though there were some scary hairstyles. Looking back at any of those pictures, are there any? I know Bono always goes on about why he hated watching Live Aid, is that he had that horrendous mullet. Was there any sort of moments on your sort of fashion past that you thought, oh dear, that was not good, I shouldn't have done
No,
that?
I just seem to have really terrible hairstyles. And I have no idea how or why. I just seem to have hair that's sort of like expanded somehow. So I could go back. That's probably what I'd do as well, have a proper haircut.
Have a proper haircut. You can't go wrong, can you? Otherwise, you could end up looking like the guy from A Flock of Seagulls, which is just never going to carry over.
No, not good.
But yes, goth, big hair. There was a lot of big hair at that time, so it was tricky, wasn't it? Peer pressure and all that. So there you go. Did you enjoy that sort of? Did you ever have a stylist in the band?
Yeah, we did. A lady called Yaz who went on to have a enormous hit with The Only Way's Up.
Oh, right. She was your stylist.
Stylist, yeah.
Did she give you some good advice apart from the hair?
No, I don't think so. No, I always seem to look terrible.
So when you look back on your sort of the work that you've done, which is the sort of record or the album or albums that you're most proudest of? Was it sort of Music for Pleasure or the Dance Society?
I think it was Into the Rain, really. I think that was sort of like a really, really well put together album. Some, great songs on there, well produced. So yeah, definitely that was sort of like the pinnacle.
That was the one. Yes. Yeah. Oh, well, I'll go and I was playing some of it today on. I think it's you're able to stream it, aren't you? And also on Discogs, you can listen to it as well. I'll have to listen. Was there any particular track that you thought that was it?
A track called Nostalgia, because we hired something called a synclavier, which was incredibly expensive synthesizer at that time. And I just messed about with the thing and created some crazy sounds.
Yes. Well, I'll go and check out Nostalgia with more focus and concentration. But look, thank you ever so much for your time, David. This has been fantastic. And yes, it's great to sort of hear your story. And that's just brilliant. So, okay, well, thanks a lot and good luck with your project that you're doing for the rest of the year and probably next. But in the meantime, thanks again for your time.
Wonderful, David, and thank you.
No problem. Take care and have a lovely weekend.
Take care.
Bye. And that was me in conversation with David Whitaker, talking about his life in music. This has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Have a great week. Stay safe.